This quilt is absolute eye candy. Meet Peppermint Lane just in time for Christmas. It's made from easy quilt blocks that look difficult, and I'm going to walk you through every step so you can make your own Peppermint Lane quilt. For the Peppermint Lane quilt top, you'll need a Christmas fat quarter bundle, or you can use yardage or scraps. It takes 1.5 yards each of red and green Christmas prints. There's 1/4 yard of gold Christmas prints and 1 yard of a white shimmery fabric for sparkle. And it also needs 2 3/4 yards of off-white for the background. We also need 1.5 yards of red fabric yardage for the border. We're starting with the Peppermint Lane star block. It's a 9-patch block made from 5 square and a square units and 4 patches in the corners. So let's get started. I want this to look a bit scrappy, so I'm going to cut my center square. I'm just going to stack these. If you'd like to pick up the pattern, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can get it. I need 16 of these because there's 16 center blocks. Now, I'm going to lay these out and cut them in blocks all at once. All right, 16 gold, nice and scrappy. My perimeter is green and I want to make these scrappy too, so I'm going to mix them all up, just stack them. I'm going to cut the corner patches a little bit oversized because I want to make sure that I've got a nice square block. And once I get the corners all stitched on, I'll trim it to the exact size. I'm cutting 5 layers at a time here. And because I've got fat quarters, I don't have a full width of fabric. I'm working with 19 inches. Now that I've got them all cut into squares, these are triangles, these are square and a square, so I'm going to cut them edge to edge. I'm going to lay that right on the diagonal so I have lots of guidelines to make sure I get this right. Okay, I want this to look nice and scrappy, so we're going to just pick these off and lay them on randomly. I like to pin them on just so that they don't move around on me. I decided not to pin them. Here's another way you can make sure they're even. Just fold it in half and make sure their dog ears are the same distance on either side. Chain piece and just a nice 1/4 inch seam. I have the other 2 sides stitched on. Press them all open. We're trimming these patches to 4.5 inches. This ruler is my Tucker Trimmer 3, and the purpose of this ruler is to square blocks to perfect measurements. You use this corner if it's a full inch, and you turn it around and use this corner if it's a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to use this side because these with the raw edges need to be 4.5 inches. And then I want to make sure, see there's my 4.5 inch mark, that my block is centered right there. All right, so I'm making sure I've got 1/4 inch here and 1/4 inch here. And I trim that off. Turn it around, line that up so that I've got my 4.5 inches there. This is lined up, this is lined up, and I've got 1/4 inch here and 1/4 inch here. Trim the other 2 sides. And we'll trim all of our square and a square patches the same way. I'm working on the other square and a square for our center blocks, and that's where we have the silver white, 2 green on one side and 2 red triangles on the other. I've stacked all of my reds together. Cut a strip, and then I just cut the squares, and then I line it up right here on my board and cut the diagonal. These patches within the center block are all the same size. When you're doing the square and a square with the white in the center, to keep these straight, the first time with the first two corners, make it the opposite, a red on one corner side edge and a green on the other, and then you can't go wrong. And then you do a red and a green when you do the second edges. Here's the square and square, that's red and green, and now we're going to trim them to exactly 4.5 inches. And then we just trim both edges. You can do this with a regular ruler as well, but the Tucker trimmer makes it very nice. And then trim. That's why I make the triangles a little bit oversized, so that when we trim it like this, we got a perfect 4.5 inch square. These are going to fit together like this. We have all of our square and a square done for our center block. We just need the 4 patches for the 4 corners. These are going to be really simple. The 4 patch corners, we do strip quilting. This is, look, this is a staple for any quilter. We stitch these together, 1/4 inch, press toward the red. So what I have here is random red patches. One side is my silvery white and the other is my plain white. And then once we come back, I'm going to press toward the red. Once we come back, I'll show you how we cut these. I pieced my strips. I'll just set this aside. We do the same thing on both. I square it up on the end. Just trim that right off. I like to work from the other side. Since these are 4.5 by 4.5 unfinished, each of these strips was 2.5, and each of these cuts will be 2.5. So just line that right up and cut all the way down your strip. Make sure you don't get off center. Every now and then stop and make sure it's still square. Sure, as I line this up, this is still straight along this edge. If it's not, just trim it up so that it stays perfectly square. I'm going to do the same with this. And there's my 2.5 inch cuts. And I want this to be nice and scrappy, so I'm going to trim up my other burgundy colors so that I have lots of variety. The next step, all we need to do, separate them by the plain white and the frosted white. I'll need one more of these to finish the block. And place them opposite each other. Stagger them like that, flip them over, so that those seams lock together, and stitch 1/4 inch right there. Okay, I'm going to go stitch those. We're on the last step of assembling this center block. Now, if you haven't noticed, we're assembling a 9 patch because it's 3 by 3, and we're going to stitch these in rows, press them, and then stitch the rows together. I want to make sure that point right there is as close to that center as possible. So I'm going to place a pin right there to hold them together. And I'll take that pin out before I get to it. 1/4 inch seam. Let's see how that turned out. Okay, that turned out quite good. And then we just do the other side. Make sure that you don't get mixed up. Make sure that this frosted or whatever you're using is facing the same direction as this one. Put my pin in there again, right there. Line it up perfectly with that seam. That looks quite good. Do all 3 rows. Use your pin to line up the seams. On the center row, where we have the 3 square and a square lined up, make sure that the red triangles are facing in and the green ones are facing out. We'll use our little trick with the pin again. There will be a little bit of bulk here in the center. Don't sweat it. Use your seam ripper to flatten those seams out so they don't come up on you, and line that edge up there. We just have a final press here, and then we'll stitch the 3 rows together. These I'm going to press toward the 4 patch. All right, there's that one. This one I'm going to press toward the center. Nice. Red triangles in. Doesn't really matter which way this goes. And then this one has the red triangles in this way. And now I'm going to just piece those together. You see how those seams lock together? These 3, do your best to line them up. I put a little box stitch there to keep it together. Stitch along, line these up like you did on the other sides. Now those 2, I want to make sure that's laying flat underneath. I'm going to take that pin out now. And this one lined up nicely as well. That one's wanting to buckle up a little bit. I'm just going to hold it in place with my seam ripper. That's pretty good. And then we just do the same thing with the other edge or the other row. Again, I like to set the seam. We'll press them toward the 4 patch this time. That's the only spot with a bit of a heavy seams. And I'll press the other side the same way. That's all the steps we need to finish this pretty center block. I've made it this far with all of these blocks, and I'm just going to give you a few tips to help you along with this Peppermint Lane quilt. I find it useful to stack all of your different prints so that as you cut the strips and triangles, they'll already be randomized, so you can make it look scrappy and it's already done for you as you piece. For the square and a square patches, I like to make the triangles a little bit oversized so that after you stitch them, you can trim them perfectly to 4.5 inches. Now, there's a link in the description below if you'd like to pick up the pattern. All of the exact measurements are in there. I started originally pressing these, so I was pressing the triangles all toward the 4 corners, but I've changed my mind after I made a few of those. And what I decided to do was on the first 2 triangles, press them toward the center square, and then on the second 2 corners, press them toward the triangle. That helps reduce the bulk right here, because they're going to stitch together in right there where they meet. This next tip is as you can work it out, but you will notice that sometimes this triangle is pressed out and that one is pressed the opposite way. They'll fit together the best to reduce the bulk because they'll lock together like this. And it just makes it a little less bulky on each side. That doesn't always work out. If not, what I do to compensate, I press them open, which distributes that bulk both directions. That helps again, because we want this to lay flat. This is the Sash Cornerstone. It's a simple red and green 4-patch surrounded by off-white triangles to create a square in a square. It looks polished, but it's a quick and beginner-friendly patch to make. This is the Cornerstone Patch for the sashing, and it fits at the end of the Peppermint Lane sash. Now, this is very straightforward. We've done these two before. It's just a 4-patch and then a square and a square. So we just cut our strips. The measurements again are in the pattern. Stitch them all together randomly so it looks scrappy. 1/4 inch seam. And we cut them up. I'm going to go do one of these, cut it up. Press it toward either the green or the red. And it doesn't really make much difference for these. Just make sure that if you start pressing toward the green, press them all toward the green. Or if you press toward the red, same thing. Press them all toward the red. Strip sets are done. I decided to press toward the green. Then we just cut them up into 2 patches. Once you get them all cut into 2 patches, just place them together in a nice scrappy way so that they're opposite. That's why we press them all toward the same color, so that when you do this, they lock together there. The 4 patches done. Press it either way, it doesn't matter. This is the square and the square part of this. Place our triangles on either side. This one there's less guesswork because that little point can line up with where that seam comes and you know you have it centered. So like we did with the other patches, 1/4 inch, and then we're just going to press them open. Went ahead and finished all 4 corners. I pressed them all toward the white on this patch. Now just trim off those dog ears. We don't need those, they just add bulk. I'm going to use my Trucker Trimmer 3, and I'm going to make sure they are all 3.5 inch. These are 3.5 inch with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we have perfect 3.5 inch cornerstones. You can place them on the quilt. You can put them all with the green in one direction. You can alternate them. You can just put them in random. You can put them all the same direction. That's your choice. It's going to look great either way. This is the Peppermint Sash. It's inspired by candy canes and Christmas trees. It looks intricate, but it's just alternating red, green, and off-white strips cut on the diagonal and framed so the strips float on the off-white background. The next patch we're making is this gorgeous peppermint sash. And this is so much easier than it looks. So stay with me. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. It's so much fun, and you're just going to be amazed at how easy it is. We're going to cut the peppermint sash from these strip sets. That's the first thing we're going to do. So let's get going. I'll show you how to make this. Have you ever used the diagonal lines on your cutting mat? These are very important lines. And let me show you. There's one that runs all the way across the board. The stripes are at 45-degree angles. This line is 45 degrees right here. That's a 45-degree angle. So all you need to do, because we piece these in strips and then cut them apart after, line up the strips according to the pattern. The 2 wider ones go on either edge. Now, if you've got like a selvage here, make sure that's crossed the line because we're going to cut that part out. And line this one up here. The next one, make sure it covers the diagonal line right here. And you do that all the way up the line, right there. And just line them all up like this. Now, I like to take them to the sewing machine one at a time because I don't want to lose my positioning here. I'm just going to take a little pin, flip this one over here. Just want to make sure I didn't move that. Okay, right there. I'm going to put a little pin in it so it doesn't move on me. And then I'm going to stitch here 1/4 inch. And I'm going to press it toward the red fabric. So I've got my 1/4 inch seam and I pressed it toward the red fabric. Lay it back down on the board. Make sure You're in the same position where that selvage is over the line, and then we're ready to stitch on the next piece. Keep it in place, just flip it over, secure it with a pin, take it to the sewing machine, and we're going to do the same thing. Now I have 3 pieces on my stripes. Again, press toward the red. Now there's 2 reasons why we do that. It's always best to press toward the darker fabric if you can. You can't always do that, but if you can, because it's less likely that the dark fabric, sometimes it can show through a light fabric on the front. And the second reason is I want my stripes to be a little bit elevated. So by having the seams pressed toward the red, it pops up a little bit. Let's line this back up. Make sure you get it in the right position, and we're ready to stitch the green strip. Pin it again, and we're going to do the same process for the whole strip set. How is this going for you? It's a lot of fun, isn't it? Take your time on these. Just make sure it continues to be lined up with this diagonal line on your board, and that each new strip, the selvage on the edge is past that diagonal line. Just flip it over, pin it in place, and sew another 1/4 inch. Strip set's all finished. Let me just show you the back. Everything is pressed toward the green and red, so it pops up a little bit. Very pretty, and you don't see the dark fabrics through the white. The next step is where the magic happens. Make sure this is lined up against one of your straight lines on your board. This is lined up against our guideline, our diagonal line. Bring it as far this way as you can because we don't want to waste any of this strip set. And make sure all of the strip salvages are over the line. Get a nice big ruler and line it up right here. Take a look along the edge here. All of our fabric are on the good side. Nice sharp blade. And do a nice straight diagonal cut along that line. Don't move your ruler until you know everything's cut. You can see how it's going to come together. Now we start cutting our strips this way. From this point, we just start cutting this like we would any other strip set. I'm going to turn it around just because it's a little bit easier. Ruler, and these are cut 1 3/4 inch. And make sure you've got the full 1 3/4 inches right here with that edge along the straight edge. Nice clean cut. Now I'll cut the rest of them after. I just want to show you what we have here. Line it up against your template. So we've got 1/4 inch seam on each side, here and here. Because these are all cut on the diagonal, they're a little bit stretchy. But you don't need to stretch these. This is very forgiving. Because these float on the white background, it's not going to show if they're off by 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch or whatever. They will look lovely floating against the white background. This is 12.5 inches, so that's the finished block is 12 inches, so you need 1/4 of an inch on either side. When you print these and paste them together, it's very important to use your ruler and make sure you've got the full 12.5. I'm going to lay it on top. It's actually a little bit easier. You don't need to stretch it, just lay it gently. And then just make a nice straight cut on either end. That's all there is to it. This is one of the funnest quilt sashes I've ever made. Next step is very simple. Just attach the 2 white strips on either side. Because this is diagonal and a bit stretchy, these are cut on the straight grain, so they're not so stretchy. They become more of a stabilizer, so you just lay it over the edge. You can pin it in place if you like. 1/4 inch. I like to stitch from this side. This is not going to stretch like the bottom will. I'm just going to take this to the sewing machine and be right back. There, stitched 1/4 of an inch, pressed toward the white. One last little step is just trim these up on the either end. One last little adjustment, if you want. It's not necessarily mandatory, but I can be kind of a bit of a fusspot over getting these seams accurate. Just make sure that it's 3.5 inches in this wide. And it is. Now, if you find that either top or bottom are a little wonky or wavery, just trim them off to your 3.5 inches. That's that. I've made these strip sets out of fat quarters. You might have a full width of fabric, but if you do, maybe you want to cut them in two so that you can randomize the prints a bit different. This one that I finished, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 peppermint sashes from this one strip set. I just discard that. Now we'll join the sash rows and block rows and stitch everything together with the borders to finish this quilt top. This is the really fun part where we piece the whole quilt top together. We're going to put this together in rows. So for the top we do a sash row, and then we do a block row, and then repeat the whole length of the quilt. For each row, select 3 peppermint sash and 3 cornerstone blocks, piece them together, let's say on the left, and then press it toward the sash. For the block row, take 3 of them again and piece the peppermint sash to the left side, press toward the sash so that these are going to lock together because they're pressed in opposite directions. All right, so now we do that, like I said, for 3 of them. There's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Once you get that piece them together so you have the whole row, or you have 3 blocks in a row. For the last row, stitch the sash on both sides and the cornerstone blocks on both sides. And again, just press toward the sash. And then once you get those all pieced, you stitch the sash and the block row together. Have fun picking out the fabrics for this. I really enjoyed this collection, and I'll put together a project page on my website what collections they have that will look lovely in this pattern. I added a narrow white border that lets the blocks float on the background, and this beautiful red border that gives it a lovely festive feel. Don't forget to press like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Happy holidays and happy holiday quilting.